All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. So I know you're used to seeing Nawel at this point. Nawel is out, so we're gonna get started a little early today because I don't have any announcements other than two quick reminders that if you have missed any episodes or you want to revisit past episodes, you can go to the Negative Space Comics YouTube channel or search Negative Space Comics on any major podcasting platform. You'll find all the recordings there. And this episode, the one that we're about to do, will be up next Wednesday. And secondly, and lastly, if you have any questions, please ask them in the Q&A. Ask them as soon as you have them. Don't wait for the end because we might run out of time. So ask the questions as soon as you have them, and we'll get to them as soon as possible. All right, so let's get to today. So today we're talking with Scott Chantler. Scott is the cartoonist of the critically acclaimed graphic novels Squire and Knight, Bix, and Two Generals, which was nominated for 2 Eisner Awards, selected for Best American Comics 2012, and voted by CBC's Canada Reads as one of the 40 best Canadian nonfiction books of all time. His other works include Northwest Passage, which was nominated for Eisner and Harvey Awards, and the Three Thieves series, which was the winner of the Joe Shuster Award for Best Comic for Kids and listed by YALSA as a great graphic novel for teens. In 2015, he served as writer-in-residence at the University of Windsor, the first cartoonist to be appointed so by a Canadian university. He lives and works in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, where he is hard at work on a sequel to Squire and Knight. Scott, welcome.
There we are.
There
I
you
did
are.
it. I turned on the camera and the microphone.
It's always,
Thank you. Thank you.
of course, that's always the hardest part. Once you get here, it's in the clear.
Yeah, I was
Uh,
kind of clicking it a couple times.
so let's start with your creative origin story, that sort of the original nugget that made you want to tell stories in the first place.
I've been trying to think of an answer to this question, um, but I honestly can't remember a time when I wasn't interested in telling stories and specifically with words and pictures. I can't remember a time when I wasn't aware of what comics were,
Mm.
uh, or remember a time when I wasn't trying to make them myself. So I don't know. It seems to be a part of just who I am. I was aware from an early age of the Batman TV show from the 60s. I'm not quite that old, but I was a little kid in the 70s, and everything on afternoon TV in the 70s was a rerun from the 60s. And so, like things like that Batman TV show really were a big part of my day as a little kid. And certainly the sound, like, I don't know if kind of that made me understand who Batman was, and that led me to comics, or vice versa. Like I say, I really can't recall, but it was definitely in the kind of soup, the cultural soup that that I was cooked in.
I like the cultural soup. I've never heard that before. I'm gonna have to start
I
using that. That's
I just improvised that on the fly. Can you tell?
yeah, it was
um,
convincing.
yeah, but I started. I actually have some comics that I made when I was 5 years old in 1977, and yeah, little Batman and Spider-Man comics that I made, and they're done with crayon, and the comics a 5-year-old would make. But I sold those to my grandmother's neighbor for 25 cents each. And then on my 16th, the reason I have them is because on my 16th birthday, she gave them back to me as a gift. So yeah, I've kind of been in the comics business since I was at least five.
That's
And yeah,
awesome.
just I've really never thought about doing anything else or
Mhm.
wanted to do anything else or been good at anything else, frankly. Like, thank God it's this, because I was not gonna play the trombone or something.
And I was gonna ask because that's something, I'm always curious about is if there was ever anything else you almost ended up doing or any other form your storytelling almost took, but it sounds like it was always comics.
I think for storytelling it was always comics. I think, like a lot of people my age, when Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, I had a brief fling with archaeology until I realized they don't beat up Nazis, and then I lost interest. Uh, Other than that, it was comics. Other than a brief time in 1980.
That's great. So So then we'll skip ahead a bit to like when, because there's a difference between being fascinated with comics and making it your career. So at what point did it become obvious to you that you could like do this for a living, that this could be something you focus on?
Yeah, I definitely, by the time I was 18 or so, I was definitely trying to um, kind of point myself towards an eventual career in comics.
Mm,
And so I was, doing up 4 or 5 page sample packages and sending them off to Marvel and DC and all the stuff you kind of did at the time to try to break into comics. And try to picking up skills that I thought I would need, like inking with a brush. I went out to the local art store and bought a brush and smeared ink all over the place and myself, with it, trying to figure out how to work that thing. And I mean, there's so many places now where you can go to college and stuff and like learn comics for 3 years. I used to teach in a program like that in Toronto. I taught writing for comics for 5 years, and there was nothing like that in like the late '80s when I was in high school. So yeah, I kind of did everything I could. I just, all I wanted to do was write and draw all the time anyway. So I did those things. But yeah, I also tried to, pay close attention. I had a really good high school art teacher, which was a blessing. Linda Maskell at Central Elgin Collegiate in St. Thomas, Ontario. Shout out. Who really stressed like basic drawing skills, like drawing from life. Whereas a lot of high school art classes are like, make this paper mache egg or something. Uh, she was really like drawing, drawing, drawing. She would set one of the students up on like a, chair as like a model or something, not nude, of course, but you'd get you get some life drawing in, which
mm.
otherwise you wouldn't get until college or university. And then when I did go to college, University of Waterloo here, um, I tried to put together an education for myself in comics. It was a little bit of fine art. It was a little bit of film studies. It was a little bit of English literature, a little bit of drama, a little bit of English writing. Just anything that I thought could go in the mix and
Mm.
eventually lead me here is what I did. And the whole time, like I say, I kept making my own comics. Me and a friend in high school who wanted to be a writer, as young people often do. Kind of, he wrote a thing, and then I made it into a comic. And then, by the time I was in university, I was going to conventions with my portfolio and trying to get something going. And did some very small, embarrassing small press stuff in the '90s. And yeah, just kept plugging away, being stubborn and sharpening my skills.
So even from a young age, you were out there like trying to break into this industry. Were you all self-educated? Like, how did you figure out how the industry works, or were you kind of just feeling your way around?
Yeah, like largely self educated, because if you're a kid who likes to draw, you just draw all the time anyway, just as a hobby. And whether you know it or not, that's training, it's practice, it's skill building. But like I say, a couple of good teachers along the way, some smart choices that turned out in university for um, educational stuff and that. And then again, like I said, kind of going to conventions, being around, talking to editors, talking to other people who are trying to break in, trying to bend the ear of any professional creator who would give you the time of day at that age. Some do, some don't. So get some good stories and some bad stories about that. And yeah, I just went after it. I
Mm,
just kind of went around trying to meet and talk to whoever I thought had information that I needed to know.
mm. I like that. Something that creatives don't often excel at, which is going out of your way to talk to people. We're not usually talkative people, but no, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
And then I had a follow up to that, and in my comments I lost it. So I want to jump ahead to I wanted to ask you about sort of breaking in. It's this I feel like it's this ambiguous term that means different things to different people. But was there a point, where you felt like you were finally here doing what you wanted to do, and that it was sort of like, I don't know, I don't want to say you felt like a success, but you felt like you were really doing it?
Doing, yeah, like in comics for real.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a couple of things. After doing everything I could in the 90s, carrying my portfolio around to conventions, sending in submission packets to all the then big publishers, um, I couldn't get anything going other than some of these like rinky-dink kind of really small indie press things. And I was in my 20s and kind of needed to make a living by that point. So I did commercial illustration for several years, but still really wanted to do comics. That was still kind of the goal and the dream. So I started a web comic. This is like maybe the year 2000, back before web comics were, well, they were a thing, but there were like 12 of them, you know, and but I was one of the 12. And I wasn't doing this because I thought this was a way to break in.
Mm.
At that point, no one had done it that way. I might have been the first for all I know. Um, but it was just a thing to kind of have on my illustration website that would update every day or every couple of days, and hopefully bring some business that way, and also just to kind of scratch the storytelling itch for
Mm.
me. I was not doing this as a kind of a professional career advancement move at all. I wish I'd been that smart. But yeah, I started doing this strip, and after a little while, I started getting emails from Jay Torres, who's a comics writer here in Canada. He does a lot of great work for kids. Wrote Teen Titans for many years. Um, just really, I could list his whole resume, but we'd be here the full hour. Great comics writer, great guy. Really is always on the lookout for new talent. Like a lot of writers, he's always looking for artists to work with, and he has brought a lot of people into the comics business, and I am definitely one of them. And he was emailing me about this online webcomic of mine, and eventually he said, "Well, I've got this pitch in at Oni Press, and if it goes, you'd be a great artist for it." And by then, like I say, I wasn't really looking for comics anymore. I'd kind of given up a little bit. I was like, yeah. I didn't even know who Oni Press was. They were pretty new at the time too. And then a couple months later, he emailed me back and was like, "Yeah, I got a green light, and the editors want to talk to you and see some samples and that kind of thing." And so Jay and I did that book together, which was originally going to be a 4-issue miniseries, but it was 2003. Is when it was released anyway, which was kind of the breakthrough year for graphic novels and bookstores.
Mm.
And that was the year, as you may recall, that it kind of changed from a periodical business to a book business. Suddenly, a lot of publishers were like, "Let's take this 4-issue miniseries and make it an original graphic novel." And we've kind of been there ever since. So, yeah, our 4-issue miniseries became an original graphic novel called Days Like This, which I do not have in front of me, but was a good little start into the business for me.
Mm.
And then Jay and I did another book together. And then after that, I started pitching my own stuff. So getting that first book with Jay for Oni Press, who seemed like a real, a real legit comics publisher that I was working with for the first time. And they were great place to start, especially 20 years ago. Oni Press was hitting home runs all over the place. They were kind of the place for new talent in the early
Mm.
2000s, and I was very lucky to be a part of that. But after the 2 books with Jay, I started pitching my own stuff, and I pitched them this book called Northwest Passage, which was the first thing I ever wrote for myself to draw, and they bought it, and so that was kind of the second big moment for me where I'd kind of broken in as an artist, but now I had broken in as a writer,
Mm.
and they were giving me my own book. And I can remember the little dance I did around the kitchen after I got the email that project was greenlit, because then I really felt like, okay, like I'm in as an artist, I'm in as a writer. this is like the third book by this point. There's going to be more books. I think I can start calling this a career. And so yeah, those were both big moments and quite unexpected.
I want to go back to because you meant it's a great example of putting your stuff out there and how it can lead to opportunities. I
Mm.
was curious when when you felt ready to start putting yourself out there, because I know like there's a difference between putting stuff out there that could get attention. There's nothing like putting stuff out there that you just aren't ready to start sharing yet. So how did you know when it was ready to start sharing this stuff?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I really think it's never too early to start putting your stuff out in front of people. If you wait until you feel like your work is 100% there, you're never going to put any work out there. Like I'm 51 years old. I've been making comics for 20 years. I still don't feel like my work is quite there. Like Squire and Knight just came out, but I drew it a couple years ago, and I'm already seeing the panels I would go back and redraw. And like I'm working on book two now, and it seems much better to me. But a year from now, it's also going to look like my old work. And like being an artist is kind of you're ping ponging back and forth between just like crippling self doubt and outrageous self confidence. And like on one of the days that you feel like you're really doing something, put your work out there because you can't like at best I get my stuff to about 85% of what it is in my head. Like that's a good day at the desk. And yeah, you're never going to feel 100% ready.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's like having a baby or something. If you wait until you feel like you're financially prepared, whoever feels financially prepared for anything, it's one of those kind of situations. Yeah, you're never going to feel 100% confident in your work. If you do, that's probably a bad thing because you're going to stop growing and trying to top yourself. So I really, I always tell people like start a web comic. Don't don't draw sample pages. Don't audition. Just start making comics. And it's a lot, obviously, with a web comic, it's a lot harder to get noticed now than it was 23 years ago when I did it. There's, everyone and their uncle has a web comic. But, if it's any good at all, you will start attracting readers and they'll tell you if it's good or not. But yeah, you just get stuff out there. And if nothing else, it gives you an excuse to draw every day and to produce something. And you may find the feedback from an audience helpful or unhelpful, but either way, putting stuff out there is the first step. Whatever stage you're at,
Mhm.
just get some work out there.
I love that. And then I want to ask about the which was going to be the subject of this whole talk, which is your connection to history. What is it about history that made you want to write stories, fiction and nonfiction, based in past times?
Um, I mean, part of it was just the practical um, kind of intro that I had into the comics business because that first book I did with Jay Torres, Days Like This, was set in the early 60s. And so Jay was writing it, but, I had to draw it. So I had to, you know, it's a little before my time. So, you dig into some books and some internet research and all that stuff. And, you got to design costumes and sets and all these things that look like the early 60s and specifically a California music business early 60s. And that book did well enough that I started people seem to think that I was successful with that with getting a look that felt convincingly period. So the second book Jay and I did together, which was called Scandalous, was set in the 50s in Hollywood and was about two rival newspaper columnists. And so, you dive in, you do a bunch more research, Hollywood in the 50s, blah, blah, blah. And so by then I was starting to get a bit of a reputation as, a guy who can handle historical material.
Mhm.
Is not afraid of doing some research. And so when it came time to pitch my own thing, Northwest Passage, here it is again, out of print, unfortunately, but I got one. um, I mean, it kind of seemed, even 2 books in, I had already kind of built a bit of a niche. And so I remember pitching them a few ideas, but I think they were all uh, set in some historical period or another.
Mhm.
But also just in terms of kind of inspiration and getting ideas of things to write about. Um, History is just full of interesting characters and events and episodes, and the word story is right there in the word. And it's a very fertile environment for ideas. The world's been around a long time, and a lot of stuff has happened, and some of it may be interesting to make comics about. I have found it is. So both in a kind of a practical career sense and just in an inspirational sense. Um, I find it interesting, and I'm not afraid to do the research.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's the way to really kind of force yourself to learn something. There's an old saying: if you want to learn everything there isn't to know about a subject, write a book about it. And that's true. I mean, if you're gonna write a book about World War II, which I did, you got to know your business about World War
Mhm.
II, and so on, whatever the era or event is.
Yeah, I was a history major in college, so you're
Hmm.
preaching to the choir there with that.
Yeah, there you go.
But I wanted to ask you too. You mentioned research many times, and research can often be this endless rabbit hole of when do I know enough to tell the story. So I'm curious how you balance research and historical accuracy with still having time to tell the story, and how much you balance, the importance of historical accuracy with the importance of telling a good story.
Yeah, that is something that it's a great question for starters, and is something that people who write any kind of historical material think about all the time. For me, speaking only for myself here, using my I statements, um, story really has to come first. I'm not a historian. I'm not. I'm never writing educational comics. The primary goal is never to just feed people a bunch of information about some historical subject. There's always a story. There's always a theme that is interesting to me, and that's to me, I'm going kind of more in the direction of literature than history. Uh, that said, you've got to kind of know you've got to know your subject well enough to be convincing about that subject.
Mhm.
If I'm telling, I'm going back to World War II again, but just because it's an easy example. If I'm writing a book set in World War II, uh, the what am I trying to say here? Just a lot of gesturing and grunting at this
That's
point.
fine.
um, you've got to know a convincing amount about the Second World War, because if you get it wrong, the audience immediately it's like, bing, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. So yeah, while knowing your subject, you've also got to tell the story you want to tell and not be pulled off in every different direction, just trying to cram the reader full of factual information, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. I have found um, the times in my career when I've done nonfiction versus fiction, I have found the two to be really different to write.
Mhm.
Fiction is additive, right? You're starting with a blank page or a blank screen, and you're filling it with stuff until you feel like your story is done and then you stop. Nonfiction is subtractive. You do a ton of research, right? And you've got all this research about, subject X, and you have to find a story in that by taking away all the bits in your research that aren't the story, right? And sometimes it's hard to know when you're done. Like with fiction, you're kind of done when you say you're done. But with nonfiction, maybe you're halfway through writing the thing and somebody opens a closet door and they find a shoebox full of letters or something from 70 years ago. And that's new research that you've got to incorporate and then kind of find your story again. That happened to me while I was writing Two Generals, which I'm going to hold up. This is a book mine from 2010. It's about my grandfather's experiences in the Second World War. That's probably why I keep defaulting to World War II as an example. This was the first nonfiction historical thing I'd ever written. And I really learned a lot during it about how to handle historical material. But that situation I described happened to me, where I was halfway through a first draft of the book, and I connected with the books about my grandfather and his friend Jack, and I connected with Jack Chrysler's widow about halfway through the project, and she of course had a ton of information about Jack that I hadn't known on the first pass, and which had to it really just affected the whole book. I had to just kind of start again. And that's writing nonfiction for you.
So speaking of differences of approaches, you also write for kids, which Squire Knight, which we're going to get to here in a second.
Yep.
You had the Three Thieves series. How does your approach differ depending on your audience? Like, do you approach writing for kids differently than you do writing an adult story?
I really don't. It's probably not an answer that's going to lead to a lot of discussion because
okay.
the answer is pretty much no. I'm one of those people. Like I've read interviews with Maurice Sendak and people like that who just maybe didn't even like children. Roald Dahl, I think, was an example of a children's author who didn't like children. And I mean, there's a certain extent to which I probably don't intellectualize quite as much writing for kids. If you really backed me in a corner and made me, suggest a difference, it's like if I'm writing for kids and I think of something fun, it goes in. Like like if I'm writing for adults, I might spend more time trying to talk myself out of that crazy thing, because like our 40-year-old's gonna buy this. If it's 12-year-olds, you're like, yeah, let's just throw this hilarious thing in, and kids will love it, and they usually do. But other than that, like when it comes to story craft, I just no difference for me. Just really no difference. I'm just trying to, there's a lot of balls to juggle when you're writing, and I mean it's challenging enough without trying to second guess, the age of the reader and just all that stuff. My sensibilities are fairly PG-13 to begin with. I don't think I have some hardcore sex book in me, or yeah, yeah, every fourth word out of my characters' mouths isn't the F word, or anything like that. So my stuff tends to play to a pretty wide audience. I always use Pixar as a good example. At least Pixar kind of in their classic days, that first 15 years or so of the Pixar studio, when it just seemed like they couldn't lose. Yeah, their films aren't for kids per se. Some of them skew younger than others, but for the most part, they're just really solidly crafted stories that would appeal to small children or adults or grandparents. or whoever. They're
Mhm.
just it's just good storytelling, and they're not dialing down the craft because there's young people in the audience. If anything, they're dialing it up. Like
Mhm.
some of those early Pixar films were the best films of the year they came out, and yeah, I've always just kind of yeah, I've really just wanted to cast as wide a net as possible with my stories. Um, not in a kind of ingratiating, let's please everyone kind of way, but just in the way that yeah, Pixar or early Jim Henson or uh, people. I often describe myself like I want to be the Tom Hanks of comics. I want to do like quality work that appeals widely, and that's just me. That's just my vibe. It's just my sensibility. So I don't really, I really don't think much about it. I always just go out. Every time I pick up my pencil, I try to do something of value with it. And in terms of who to sell the work to, I kind of leave that to the marketing department. You know, like I know that Squire Knight is a middle grade book. I don't not even sure exactly what that means. Is it 9 to 12 or 8 to 12 or whatever? Somebody else's problem, as far as I'm concerned. I've seen some of the reviews for this that like point out that the word "damn" is in it, like contains the word "damn." I don't know. Apparently, I don't know. Apparently that's a problem in the Bible Belt or something. I don't know, but apparently I only did it once, so I'm in the clear.
I like the division between children's and adult as do I include this outrageous thing or do I think about including this outrageous thing? I think that's a great way to think about writing for children or not. Like that's
Right. Yeah.
excellent.
It's really the only difference I can think of when I'm doing this versus two generals.
Hmm. So let's talk about Squire Knight then, which you can see here. You just held it up. It's fantastic. I'm probably going to say that about 15 more times
We'll get
before
it
the
going on both sides of the screen right
there
now.
we go.
Yeah.
It's really phenomenal. So I want to ask you what the sort of initial because you mentioned you'd had this done for a while. What was the initial sort of seed that sprouted this story for you?
Well, I actually swore after I'd finished my Three Thieves series, I'm going to hold one of those up as well. This is the first book, Tower of Treasure, which this was published in 2010, and I'd started writing it a few years earlier for my own children. I swore when that series was over, it was 7 books, that I was never doing kids fantasy again, which obviously turned out to be a lie. Anytime you swear you're not going to do anything, you'll be doing it within 5 years, is what I've learned in my life. Um, but um, a couple of different things kind of happened. And again, it was kind of a practical thing and kind of an artistic sensibility thing. The practical thing was that all of my adult pitches were tied up with a particular publisher who I had a first look deal with, and just couldn't pitch. Just they were sitting on all of the pitches I had available, and so my agent and I had a conversation. It's like, want to get something else going. Like, what can we pitch? And so I think so. I like kind of had this thing in my back pocket. It's like it was kind of more for kids. And I was like, yeah, let's throw this out there and see if it gets any interest. And so yeah, some of it was just kind of the simple, just business of being a professional freelancer and where is their work and how can I generate some work for myself. Um, the more kind of artistic creative answer is um, there's been a lot in the culture in the last 7 years um, where it's a lot of thinking is what can I do? What is the role of an artist in these times? Right? And like anti-intellectualism has always been part of our culture. But in the last, let's say, 7 years, um, politically, and also with the pandemic and stuff, uh, a lot of those kind of chickens have come home to roost. We've really seen in the last several years the dangerous road that anti-intellectualism eventually leads us down. So I really wanted to do a book that was about, without being explicit about any of that, that just was pro smart. I really wanted to do a book that was about how reading is good, science is real, you know, not rushing to conclusions. Yeah, not being a, smarmy, overbearing twit. How all these things are good things, and the audience for that is young people. Um, you want to catch people as early as you can with that message, I think, and it just dovetailed nicely with this image I'd always had in my head of these two characters, this squire and this knight, and the squire is the smart one, but the knight gets all the credit because he's the knight. Even though he's a overbearing idiot. so so it all kind of worked. It all just kind of seemed to come together, and it felt timely,
Mhm.
and it felt like the right time for me creatively to tell this story that I was kind of passionate about, and it also seemed the right time in the industry for a book like this. It was certainly the right time in my career, and so yeah, I ended up doing this. Ended up doing another kids fantasy series.
I love how easily you packaged what this book was about. Like, I know you say you leave the marketing up to the marketing people, but pro smart night and squad, like you packaged that so well. So
Yeah,
I'm curious. Did this story begin with a theme, like this theme of being pro smart? Or did you have the characters already?
I think I had the characters already. I write in the extras in this book. There's a few pages of kind of
Mhm.
process junky stuff here at the end. I write in here that I think the year is 1988. The movie came out. There's a British comedy film called Without a Clue that is it's Michael Caine plays Sherlock Holmes and Ben Kingsley plays Watson. And the conceit of that movie is that Watson was the real crime solving genius. Um, and Michael Caine was this clueless actor who came in to kind of be a front for the doctor's, like, side crime solving activities. I don't think I've ever even seen that movie, but I just always thought the idea of it was great and hilarious, and a fun twist on a story that we've seen played straight a million times. And so I think I started with the idea of the knight and the squire, and they would be those two types of characters. And I probably had that part of it for a while, but it wasn't until all the thematic stuff kind of, sometimes you hold on to an idea for a while and maybe you let it go because it doesn't grow, it doesn't blossom into something interesting. But sometimes the longer you hold on to an idea, the more timely it becomes, or the more another idea kind of merges into it, and it becomes something bigger and better than you initially thought it might. So that's what definitely happened in this case. But sometimes it's hard to remember, like, where do ideas come from? It rarely just hits you all at once. It's six different ideas that you have that eventually kind of merge into one idea.
This is, I'm always reading middle grade graphic novels and I recommend them. This one's so easy to recommend because of all these middle grade graphic novels out there. I feel like it's such a great self-contained story where it felt so satisfying from start to finish. Like the balance was perfect. There's humor, fantasy, mystery, drag. Like it all balances so well. And I'm
Yeah.
curious, I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If it was as easy to write as it is to read, it's such a smooth read. And I wonder if this story came easily for you, or was it pretty labor intensive?
I gotta say it did.
Mm.
It doesn't. stories don't always come. Writing, as anyone who writes will tell
Mhm.
you, is sometimes a real wrestling match with yourself and the gods. you know, sometimes it's an epic struggle. But this, once the idea was so simple and very clear, and I kind of knew, what I wanted to say with it. And so, figuring out a chain of events, of a conflict that spoke to that theme was, writing is still difficult, but
Mhm.
of all the things I've written, I think it was probably the least difficult. This
Mhm.
book just kind of came spilling out of me. It was kind of my pandemic book. A lot of the things that I was thinking about and wanted to say and stuff during those years, just kind of came out.
And then on the subject of theme, I'm always curious how artists and writers engage with theme. Were you actively thinking like, oh, I have to drive this point home, or was it just kind of happening naturally?
With this book, yes, driving that point home is kind of the point of this book.
Mhm.
And this is the first book of a series. There's a second book that is nearly finished, but it does stand alone and was meant to. The second book is just another story that is also going to stand alone and kind of puts a slightly different spin on the theme.
Mhm.
But um, yeah, with this book, I was very much writing. I knew, moral is a terrible word and lesson. And, I didn't want to be as explicit as any of that, but I definitely knew what I wanted people to take away from this story. And was, yeah, writing to that the whole way,
Mhm.
which turned out to be good. I think that's one of the reasons why the book is so cohesive and all that stuff is I knew what I was talking about most of the time. It's usually harder. It's usually harder.
And you brought up the back matter, and I had a question about something you'd mentioned in the back matter as well, which is that it was in relation to character design. You said that after you've been writing a character for a while, you can nail their appearance in a drawing or two. I'm curious. So when you're developing a character, like when do you go into the design? Do you already know who they are before you start drawing them, or do you draw them first and then sort of fill in their personal details as they go?
Um, Depends. With the lead characters, I'm sure I probably started sketching early on, even just to include in the pitch. There would have been some character designs included in the pitch. But this is one of the advantages of writing and drawing, is because even if you did leave all the drawing until after the writing was done, you've still spent an awful lot of time with those characters. you know, you really know them backwards and forwards by the time you finish writing. So I at least find it fairly easy to get what's in my head character wise onto the page. At the very least, I know what I don't want.
Mhm.
Right. I usually have it pretty well cornered in one particular area, and a few sketches is usually all it takes to find. Yeah, that's the one.
Mhm. And then I want to talk about the business side a bit because we often talk about traditional publishing and sort of the barriers that are there. And this came through an imprint of Macmillan for a second. So I want to rewind a bit and find out about where your traditional publishing journey began, when you got an agent, when that route sort of kicked off.
Yeah, I made the jump um, from kind of the comics direct market world
Mhm.
to the sort of mainstream book market world um, in about 2007, um, which I guess is kind of early. Um, People like Jeff Smith were having a huge success at Scholastic with his reprints of Bone, and
Mhm.
suddenly it just seemed like, yeah, that's where every publisher, every book publisher suddenly wanted to get into graphic novels because of what Scholastic was doing. And that was good for people like me who never quite fit into the direct market comic book world. Um, On the strength of the success of Northwest Passage, which I showed you earlier, I pitched this to McClellan and Stewart, which is a old, venerable Canadian literary publisher, actually owned by Random House. And yeah, this is the book about my grandfather. And so yeah, another kind of historical project. And that was kind of my big break into the world of kind of mainstream publishing. And the Three Thieves books happened around the same time. So suddenly I had a lot of work to do, both on the kind of adult and the kids side, with two different publishers in the book market. I did not have an agent at the time. Yeah, it just kind of happened because Northwest Passage turned some heads. In retrospect, I probably should have had an agent. I'm I'm very good at knowing my rights. I am not afraid to kind of negotiate on my own behalf, all that stuff. But just things like subsidiary rights, and that's your kind of film, TV, media, ebooks, blah blah blah, all those things. An agent knows, you know, what you should be letting go of or not letting go of, or what percentages and stuff for all those kind of things. And also just being able to kind of open doors. I mean, I had more work, like I say, than I knew what to do with at the time. And so I felt like, oh, why do I need an agent? I'm getting all this work. But you know, down the road, eventually you find something in your contract that you're like, oh, right. And then also when it came time to not have a bunch of work, um, I started thinking, what's the next step? Like, I want to go. I was working with this big Canadian literary publisher, but the next step was obviously big American literary publishers. Your Big Five, your Simon and Schuster's, your Macmillans, all that stuff. What finally made me get an agent was I started shopping around this book, um, Bix, which came out in 2020. This is a very experimental book that kind of tries to visualize music in different ways. It's mostly silent. It's kind of depressing. It's about jazz in the 20s, which nobody cares about anymore. And it was just a difficult book to sell. I mean, lots of people were kind of thought it sounded cool, but every editor I talked to was like, "This sounds really interesting. We hope someone will publish it someday." Um, so that's the thing that kind of made me finally break down and start working with an agent. And I'd had one recommended to me, and I finally gave her a call and said, "Can you help me sell this book?" And she came back to me 6 weeks later with Simon and Schuster, who published Bix. So it was clear that she was going to be doing good work for me right away. But if nothing else, like an agent, like that's really what they can do for you, is open those doors at the biggest publishers. I've been in the business a long time. I know some people, whatever, blah blah blah. Here's what I'm working on. But yeah, those big publishers are not just going to deal with whoever that you bump into at the bar at Chicago Comic Con. you know. Um, so yeah, what I've really found that my agent is able to do is she's able to open the big doors, and once they're open, I kind of know what to do. But yeah, I need someone with the keys to those
Mhm.
doors.
So do you have like because I know different agents work in different ways. Some have an editorial approach where you bounce ideas off them and work together, or is she just someone where you hand her a finished product and say, go sell this?
Yeah, ours is very much a business
Hmm.
relationship, and if you're watching this and you're looking for an agent, you talk to them. It's a relationship. It really is almost like a marriage, and some people are not going to be suited to each other. I certainly talk to agents. I talked to a really big name agent who, seconds into the conversation, I thought this isn't going to work. I mean, she was a bulldog, and like I'm a bulldog. Like I don't need that. And I also don't want an editor who, like you say, kind of works with me editorially. I have a pretty clear idea what I want to do. with my own work. I want an agent who likes my work and respects it and is just going to help me sell it. But whatever you need, there's probably an agent out there willing to do that. I know a lot of people who do work closely with their editor on pitches and on books as they're in production. Yeah, not for me. I don't necessarily need an intermediary between me and my editor. I need an intermediary between me and the you know, green light I want to get from the publisher. And like I say, after that, I can take it from there.
Mhm. So there were multiple agents you were considering whenever you settled on the one you ended up with?
I had there was one.
Mm.
There was one, yeah, really big name agent that it was tough. It was tough because you know, she represents some amazing people and you know, represented some of my heroes. And I just, it's like, I can't believe I'm turning this down, but I gotta, this is not what I want. Yeah.
No, that's great though. I think that's something that a lot of times writers and artists think, well, any agent's a good agent and they'll take it. So you had a
Yeah.
pretty clear idea
Well,
of what you
one
wanted.
of the advantages to having waited so long to getting an agent, and there were some disadvantages, which I said, but one of the advantages was that artists kind of came to me.
Mm.
I never had that experience of like, oh, I'm a struggling writer, can't get my first book published. I got to get an agent to get this book published. It must be terrible to be in a position where you've got to essentially take any agent who will work with you. That must be really tough. And I don't have any advice about how to get around that. You know, I think in the end, it's probably better than not having an agent in the book market. But yeah, for me, you know, I at least had a little bit of ability to shop around. So I shopped around. Like I say, I found an agent who liked my work and kind of could see where I was going and wanted to help me get there, and who wanted to work for me instead of me working for her, if that
Mm.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then real quick, I wanted to ask too about publishing Squire Knight and what the process was like. Was that a pretty easy sell? It came out with First Second, which is one of my favorite. I think they're one of the best
I,
young
I
adult.
love First Second. You know, I'm
Mhm.
not just saying that because I'm working for them now. I have always, you know, when like before the agent, when I was sending pitches out, I would always start with them first.
Mhm.
I've always loved what they were. They take big swings,
Mhm.
and yeah, they've put out some great books, and even the, you know, books of theirs that maybe weren't so great, like you, but they were at least ambitious,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, I always thought that was kind of the place for me that kind of straddled the comics world and
Mhm.
the book world and the, you know, kids comics and adult comics, and it seemed like their values and my values you pretty well lined up, and I always wanted to be published with them. They were always kind of my brass ring, you know, publisher that I was, you know, trying to get. And I pitched them so many things that they turned down. But yeah, Squire and Knight seem to be the thing. I don't know if it's just that the kind of the kids fantasy market is, you know, a bit of a no brainer right now. Maybe that's what it was. It's just that the pitch hit a kind of a demographic zone that they liked, or yeah, maybe who knows what it is. who who knows what happened there? But for whatever reason, they liked this pitch and didn't like the others. I mean, they liked the others, but it was another one of those situations where this is great. Good luck with it.
So so was that something where did you tell your agent like, hey, let's go to First Second, or did she know that that was sort of like your dream place?
I yeah, I think she did. But I bumped into Mark Siegel, the publisher at First Second, at the Toronto Comic Arts Festival in 2017, I want to say. Just in the lunch line, you know, and we just happened to strike up a conversation and had a nice little chat over lunch at that festival. And and this is another reason why, you know, going to things like that is sometimes a good thing. You know, not, you don't necessarily come out of it with work on your way home from the festival, but you know, it's the contacts you meet and the conversations you have sometimes pay off. because after that, I emailed my agent immediately and said, I think Mark Siegel for a second is ripe for a pitch at this moment. And he was.
That's great. So we're almost out of time. So I want to give you a chance now. You've already shown a bunch of books, and this one's been here over my shoulder this entire time. But
That's
if you
true.
whatever you want to promote and where people can find you online or whatever you want to throw out there.
Well, obviously, Squire Knight is the new thing. It's been out about a month. It's available wherever you buy books. Josh seems to like it.
I do very much.
It's a ringing endorsement. So go get that. And also, even though it's 3 years old now, I held Bix up earlier. This came out about 6 weeks into the start of the pandemic, the first lockdown in April 2020. And a lot of people still don't even know about it. A lot of people don't know I had a new book out because it was the first lockdown. Bookstores weren't even open.
Mm.
So, in some respects, this is still kind of a new book as well. It's way more adult. It's historical. It's biographical. It's experimental. It's I don't know if you're into all those things. I might go find this as well. It could use your support. You can find me on Instagram. I'm at Scott Chantler. That's about the only social media I do anymore. The others are all pretty gross for one reason or the other. I have a website at scottchantler.com. It hasn't been updated in a million years, like a website. I really got to get Squire and Knight on there. That's my next project, is getting Squire and Knight on my website. But you can certainly go check that out. It's got information about all my older books anyway. And this weekend, if you're anywhere near Ann Arbor, Michigan, I'm going to be at the Ann Arbor Comic Arts Festival at the public library there, and I will be signing things and sketching things, and I'm giving a talk about visual storytelling on the Sunday. Come to Ann Arbor and hang out, and we'll chat more.
Love it. Awesome. Well, Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate you.
The hour flew by, man. That was great.
It did. I know. I looked up and I'm like, surely not. Now I have to ask him to promote things.
Yeah, no, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So to all of our listeners, we're going to be back in 2 weeks, and this will be up next Wednesday, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Right on.